a change order that you have to apply to that particular work order. How would you go about setting that up?
It's dependent on when you want to change the work order.
Usually it's right towards the end when you think you're done.
Yeah. First of all, if it's just if you just want to add a measure, if it's a new measure that you want to add to a job, you would just issue a new work order for that measure and put a comment in it that it was on the same job that they were already working on or something like that. You can reissue a work order if you want. What you have to do is you have to delete the previous one and then reissue it with the new information on it. That's why I'm saying it depends on when you want to issue a change, when you want to change it. If you want to change it after it's already in their hands and they're doing something with it, then you either have to issue a new one or recall the old one and issue a new one.
I guess what I'm saying is there anywhere on there that instead of having a pull down menu, you can name this change order number one, change order.
No. It's
Unless you do a whole another number.
But Tim, if they haven't submitted it, don't they have the option of deleting it though? Or
right, that's what I'm saying.
They can go back a step or two or something
right.
like that.
They can always reissue the work order or issue it if it's a supplemental work order, another work order if it's a new measure. It's new measures if you decided to add new measures to the weatherization project. You would just issue another work order for those new measures that you added.
And so if it's something that's out of the box, as far as explanation, you can explain that in a comment for an additional item.
Yeah.
And also too, you can put in your own work order number.
Uh-huh.
So if you've got a work order number, say it was like 90, it ended with 9095. Maybe you could put -1 or -2 so we know that it's related
Actually,
to the other
you-
one. Because you have 24
Create a
alphanumeric.
separate one.
We actually
You
don't
have 24 alphanumeric characters.
Tony, you're talking about a job number. The work orders don't get numbers, they're just identified and linked to the job.
Yeah.
So the job number can be changed, but the work order can't.
Okay.
So there's a couple of ways you would handle it. One is you could issue an extra system note to the vendor. So in other words, if we had originally said something about a comment down here where we said we wanted a 200-gallon tank, and we decided we really should replace it with a 250-gallon tank, you could go ahead and issue a note to the vendor. They could just change it, and then when they did the installation, you would change the cost and make the appropriate adjustment here. If it was just something like with quantity or or cost or something like that, they can just do it, and then you can make the adjustment when they report the completion event back to you. But if it's like you need to add a new measure, a completely new measure, then you've got to issue a completely new another work order for that measure.
So you got to install the water heater or something before it falls through. You kind of have to.
Right.
It's not really pick it off the list. It's
Right, but if something happens and they've got to do additional work, then you probably want them to go back to you and get approval before they do that work. And when they go back to you to get that approval, you can then add that in as a new measure. Because at any given point, I can still add a new measure. So, I'm not sure.
It's submitted to GEFA.
Yeah.
Once it's submitted to GEFA, then you can't go back.
You can't go back. But let's try to walk through that work order process. Let's say we were installing this tank and they discovered there was some other problem that they wanted addressed. What we would do in that case is go back to the job list, go back to this job, go to its priority audit list, and then possibly, they discovered, for example, let's look at this. We were a site-built home. They said, you told us to replace the oil tank. We went to replace the oil tank, and the fuel lines, from the tank to the house were completely. Come on, refresh. Right again. There we go. Sometimes this thing hangs up. So they came back and said, what really happened here is we actually had to, not only that, but we had to replace the fuel line. So you go in here, they tell you they'd replace the fuel line. In this case, you would go in here and say that, you know, they had to replace the fuel line, and it cost, you know, $25 per foot to replace the fuel line, and they had to replace, you know, 15 feet or something like that of fuel line. All right. Then you go down here and put in a comment. You know, also had to replace fuel line. Something like that.
I guess you could at that point put a date in and change order and explain why
Yeah,
you did it.
yeah, you could do something like that, you know. You could say, you know, like added to work order dated,
Yeah.
you know, whatever.
Does this thing add, is there any way to tell the date that this stuff is input? Or is that only if we put it in the comment section?
No, this work order will have its own date associated, or this, when we issue a work order for this, it'll have its own date associated with it. If we want to, what we're trying to do here is associate it with another work order in the past.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the date, and does it tell who input it?
It doesn't say on the form, but the logs know who does it. The system audit logs know what user.
So we can find out if there's a user problem.
Yes.
Within our-
Yeah. So if I save that measure, you know, now what I've got is, I've got one measure, the oil tank that's out on a work order, so it's not deletable, it's kind of the frozen measure. And now I have this new measure here that is the change. So what I would do at that point is I would have to issue another new work order back to the vendor. Again, I could put another comment here, you know, a change order to cover fuel line or something like that as a comment. Just go ahead and save that. So now I have, there's 3 work orders outstanding for this customer. One is the one that was just installed. You can see right here, you have the one that's installed. This is the one for the oil tank. And you wouldn't even have to wait for the vendor to come back. You know they've already installed that fuel line because that's what they told you they did. So all you have to do is go to the fuel line work order, excuse me, go over to the inspection list here and go to that fuel line work order. And I know it's the fuel line work order because it's the vendor one and it's still at work order level. So I click on the fuel line work order. There's the fuel line. I just say, okay, that was also installed today. Again, I can make a comment on that. You know, that it was you know, additional work required as part of oil tank replacement. And they told me the numbers already, so I don't have to change any of that. The numbers that I put in there are right, so I would just save it. So that's kind of the way you would have to process that. If it's a separate measure. If it's just a measure like this one right here, which we haven't processed yet, the one for the training crew. Now, if the change is simply that the crew goes out there and discovers that they didn't need 7 tubes of caulk to seal up the house, but they needed 8 or 9, you can just go in here and just change that number. All right? So I can just change that to 9. If it was 9, and what else do I have here? That's about the only thing that's kind of small. And they discovered maybe also that there wasn't 2 thermostats, there weren't 2 zones, there was just a single zone, so they could drop that down to 1.